I'm not only chairman of the Wildlife Foundation in Germany, but in my former days, I'm proud to have been the chairman of one of the greatest, biggest, largest wind turbine manufacturers in Germany, Repower, and I've been in that sector for decades. When we started in 2000, 3% out of the power for Germany was produced by renewables. Today it is 35%. So I think it is interesting for you to learn the lessons which we had to undergo in the last decades, because I think US has 3% of renewables today. Björn, you know that better than me. And there are some, I want to highlight some pitfalls on the way to enlarge the share of intermittent and expensive renewables. Germany has the most ambitious target for 2015 in the world. We want to reduce the CO2 by 95%, and we want to increase the renewable power up to 95. So that is done in the next 20 to 30 years without nuclear, because you know the German government had made a decision after Fukushima to shut down nuclear power stations in Germany by 2022. This is not followed by any nation in the world. Neither this target, neither the shutdown of the nuclears. And up to now, many observers thought that the German government is pursuing the most unrealistic climate policy in Europe, utterly out of touch with reality, relying in future only on wind energy, biomass, and solar. But now we know that there are outside other bodies which have less realism. The new IPCC report, which was released in Korea a fortnight ago, demands a reduction of 45% of CO2 by the next 11 years. This reduction has to come only from the developed OECD countries, you know. Since the Paris Agreement, Björn told that to you, allows developing nations to increase its CO2 emissions up to 2030. So the OECD countries, which are responsible for 37% of the CO2, of the global CO2 emissions, have to reduce their emissions by 122%. That makes 45%. That's a peculiar mathematics. So you see, China is allowed to nearly double its emissions until 2030. That is their contribution to climate change, 85% up. And already today they have 29% of the global emissions. Germany has 2%. Even if Germany is to shut down every coal-fired power plant, all cement plants, all steel plants, all aluminium, all chemicals, yes, even all industry at large, the emission reduction would be cancelled out by the growth of China's emission within a half of a year. I have seen that since several years, because meanwhile I'm the chairman of the largest copper company. And I must say, Renewables, largest copper company in Europe, not in Germany. Carbon leakage by transferring industry from Europe to China is not a very clever idea. Donald Trump maybe seem simple in the view of the European politicians, but he is not silly. He recognized that the Paris Agreement is the main tool to redistribute wealth on the globe. Yes, the planet is warming. Since 1850, the planet has warmed by around 1 degree Celsius. 1850 was the end of the Little Ice Age, a disastrous cool time with bad harvests, hunger, deaths, riots, witch trials. Do we really want to return to that kind of climate? After all, that's the IPCC baseline, minus 1.5. Why do not return to the golden age of the medieval warm period from 900 to 1000? When vineyards were located in Great Britain and the Vikings settled Greenland and this beautiful country. At that time, the global temperature was likely very similar as today. All these fluctuations in historical climate happened without the input of mankind, without man-made CO2 emissions. It was natural. Dependent on the strength of the sun, the clouds, the oceanic currents, we know that in the medieval warm period, the sun was very active. During the Little Ice Age, the sun was very inactive. Is this pure coincidence? In the second half of the last century, again, the sun was most active since 2000 years. Certainly, CO2 is contributing to warming. But the real question is how much? And how much is a contribution of natural factors? The IPCC stated that human activities are estimated to have caused approximately 1 degree of global warming. So 1 degree out of 1 degree. So it's a bold claim based on computer models. Models which have failed to reproduce clouds, ocean currents, and periods of the past. Yes, we need to change our energy system. But it is open at which pace and in which time, with which technologies and at which cost. And not to forget efficiency. We are wasting energy, like here in this room, to overcool this room. We are not very used to it in Europe, but US citizens are used to it. So the bad lessons. 35% renewables lead to a huge cost increase. And I think you are not aware that the German power consumers have to pay 26 billion euros each year to subsidize the expensive wind and solar power generation. There is a feed-in tariff in Germany and additional a cap-and-trade system in Europe. As a result, the German power prices are the second highest in Europe after Denmark. And this has serious consequences for German industry and competitiveness. Lower prices drives industrial growth in China and the reshoring and reindustrialism in USA. China is thriving without the burden of binding CO2 targets, and US is benefiting from cheap shale gas fracking, which is banned in Germany. The result is not very impressive. CO2 emissions have remained at the same level since 2010 in Germany. 35% renewables, but the same CO2 emission. That is not least because during the same time Germany has shut down the zero-carbon nuclear power stations, the most reliable in the world, by the way. So we try to rely on wind and solar. But intermittency of wind, the intermittency results in a distraction of the markets. You see that here. This is a typical January 2018. The brown lines are the demand in Germany. It's going up and down every day, and the weekend it's a little bit lower, and the blue one is the wind. So that is covering in some days 40, 50, 60%. But in some days, you see that here, maybe that is it working? Yeah. For 3 or 5 days, nothing. So this intermittency creates a lot of problems. So what is happening in these times? The coal-fired plants have to jump in and save the day. But what happens after their closure? Because we now are discussing closure of power plants in Germany. What's happened then? Who is jumping in then? So there is one solution of the green activists. They demand to build more wind farms. Then the solution is there, they say. So what happens if we make, and that is a plan, threefold of wind farms? That is the official plan of the German government to threefold the capacity of wind. So then you create sometimes a lot more than you need. And the bad story is 3 times 0 is 0. So if you build 3 times a wind farm, it stays in the doldrum, is nothing. So that does not help. So we are being told, and that's right, storage is the solution. We need more innovation in storage. In principle, is that right? Today, it is extremely expensive. Currently, cost 2 to 10 times the current price of electricity. 2 times is the pump storage, and 10 times is the battery. Think about it. If we would store for these days in Germany the water, the hydro of the Lake Constance, it is 500 kilometers square, 200 meters deep, and pump it several hundred meters to the Alps and let it run down. You need the whole basin, and that every week. So it's not so easy with the storage. So the other extreme is, you see that, what are we doing if we produce too much? Germany has 50,500 megawatts of wind. And sometimes we need only 40,000 at weekends, for instance. What do we then? So there's too much wind power in the system, and the national grid becomes unstable. The former energy minister, Sigmar Gabriel, told me the following story. The Chinese energy minister visits Germany and asks the minister Gabriel, what does Germany do whenever the turbines produce more power than it is needed? And he said, we shut them down and pay as if the power has been produced. The Chinese minister was angry with his translator and said, wrongly interpreted, no, because he thought it was wrongly translated. And so he put the question 3 times and got always the same answer. The minister told Gabriel, the Chinese minister, told him, this is not a good idea for China to pay for products which have never been produced. And think he is right. So what does it cost to shut down the wind farms in Germany to keep the grid stable? It is every year 1 billion. 1 billion. I remember Björn Lomborg's was asked, where do we get the money for the innovation? There you have it. 1 billion per year. What can you do with that in R&D? But the German public accept this by and large because most Germans think this is an environmental friendly method. But even this is questionable. The forests in the south of Germany are particularly affected by the expansion of wind farms. Why? In southern Germany, there is no wind, very little wind. And therefore, the wind turbines have been placed on the top of the wooded hills. Thousands of hectares forest was sacrificed. Endangered species of wildlife were extinguished. And as a chairman of the German Wildlife Foundation, I've been warning about this environmental destruction for years. 3% every year of the European red kites are destroyed by wind turbines, and 7% of the buzzard are killed by wind turbines every year. That means we have to wait 10 and 15 years and then they are extinguished in Germany. The same is happening to the bats. 200,000 bats are killed every year. Every turbine kills 10 bats per year. So it is not only to be seen as an environmental friendly production. There is the risk and we have to combat the risk and have not done this up to now. Is there an alternative? So we have the most developed share of intermittent renewables in Europe. When we have an overproduction, we give it to our neighbors and we get nothing for it. Even we pay them that they take us the garbage power. And in doldrums, we take the electricity from our neighbor countries. So that is something which will increase the problems in the next years because, as I said, some stations, nuclear, hard coal, will be closed in Germany. So storage. That is the most prominent R&D target, to increase the share of intermittent renewables. Otherwise, forget it. All your aspirations to increase renewables in the US will end up in this nightmare which we have experienced in Germany. But there is a long way to go. So today's storage cost by batteries, 50 euro cent per kilowatt hour. And the cost of the power is 5, so it's tenfold. So we have to decrease that. And I think we will reach in 2030, let's say 20, maybe 10. But it is to be paid additionally to the production cost. And that means no aluminum, no copper in Germany. So what is the solution then? I think I can add it to Björn's speech. We need gas power. We need clean coal with carbon capture and storage. We need the fourth generation of nuclear fission. We need the fusion technology, which has a huge potential. And yes, additional, we need wind and solar where it is commercial. This, I believe, will happen after our negative experience with current climate and energy policies in Germany. The pendulum will swing back and power engineering, technology, energy research will come back to the home country of mechanical and chemical engineering. And the sooner, the better. Thank you very much.